Welcome to Bridging the Gap, a commentary on discrimination, marginalization, race, and identity at Duke. This series hopes to shed light on the Duke experience in its entirety. This institution for some of us is like a second home during our 4 or so years here. For others, it can act at times as a reminder of struggle, oppression, belittlement, the helpless feelings that many BIPOC students and students of diverse identity face in the real world, the adult world. Duke, both historically and today, is imperfect. We only hope that in hearing from students how they've experienced their identity on campus, we can move toward a more open dialogue about some of these issues. There is a power in diversity, in a student body made up of unique experiences and differences. That has been made all the stronger with the recent Black Lives Matter protests, the movement for systemic change in the U.S. spreading to countries around the world. And so today, we talk about diversity and what diversity also means emotionally for those students on campus who have dealt with the sort of discrimination or marginalization we often like to think doesn't happen at Duke. Before we get started, we want to start off with a land acknowledgement. This will be the Bridging the Gap tradition. If we will be discussing Duke in both its grandeur and its flaws, we must recognize the traditional owners of this space. We here at Bridging the Gap want to take a moment to acknowledge the land that the greater university occupies as the ancestral lands of the Shakori, Ino, and Catawba Indian peoples. If you are not currently on campus, we encourage you to take a moment to recognize the traditional owners in your area. So, diving right in, what is discrimination? The unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people or things, especially on the grounds of race, age, or sex. That's the definition that pops up when you Google that question. But discrimination is also a feeling of demoralization. As college students, we are in this liminal space between childhood and adulthood, a space where we're trying to get a sense for ourselves, our passions, our identities. Discrimination on a college campus can make people feel unwanted, unvalued, or insignificant. We spoke with Dr. Sarah Gaither, assistant professor in the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience, about this. Her research focuses on social identities and interracial interactions. Let's take a listen.
So anytime anyone experiences a form of discrimination or prejudice, it's of course completely demoralizing. It makes you feel not worthy. It makes you feel undervalued. It makes your entire existence feel questioned. And there's no magical solution or band-aid, right, that you can put on an instance of discrimination. And what we know from a lot of psychology research is that the more discrimination someone faces, let's take this within the race and ethnicity context, usually that equates to how minority you look. So the more phenotypically Black you might look, this tends to correlate pretty strongly with facing more discrimination in your everyday life. And all of this combines together, circles back onto you as a target, and now you end up identifying significantly more with your racial identity. So in other words, the Blacker you look, the more Black you identify because you're treated with more discrimination across your life. So these three things end up piling on each other and reinforcing your identity, making you proud about your identity in some ways, but also causing you to question your identity in other ways. And that's why so much of the work focusing on racial and ethnic minority experiences is really highlighting on this notion of wanting to belong. Everyone just wants to belong in a space, in a society, within a friend group. And when you are an underrepresented group or a group that's considered lower status in our society, it can be really hard to find your place. It can be really hard to find your worth and your value, especially when you're in a society that favors the white high status group so much.
A February 2019 survey reported on by Inside Higher Ed showed that of 69 equal opportunity professionals, that's university staff members, 82% had encountered some sort of hate crime. 84% of these staffers worked at PWIs, predominantly white institutions. The National Center for Education Statistics in August of last year noted a 40% increase in campus hate crimes from 2011 to 2016. They said, beyond the physical danger that the resurgence of white nationalism imposes, incidents like these are also traumatic and undermine affected students' mental health. They were citing the white nationalist protests that took place on the University of Virginia's campus just 2 years earlier. There were over 1,000 campus hate crimes reported in 2016 alone. Higher Education Today, a blog by the American Council of Education, said the following in 2018. Students of color can experience a variety of difficult situations, contributing to experiencing greater psychological distress than white students, being victims of microaggressions and racism, Islamophobia, cyberbullying, encountering culture-related extreme expectations, and experiencing isolation and loneliness from the often vast differences between home culture and environment and that of school. I've just thrown a lot of statistics at you. What does this have to do with Duke? In August of last year, The Chronicle published a guest column discussing the white supremacist underpinnings of Duke University. Professor Dawn Taylor, Sanford Director of the Social Science Research Institute, said this: "White supremacy need not be noisy, and its essence is the quiet default that white America is the ideal, making everyone else other, who must strive to belong." I remember my sophomore year when someone wrote the N-word on the Mary Lou Williams Center for Black Culture's wall. At one point, someone hung a noose from a campus tree. A swastika was painted on the East Campus Bridge. Racism and discrimination are very much present at Duke. Duke Sr. and co-president of the Black Student Alliance, Toby Akinyalu, told us how he's experienced discrimination as an African-American man and how that impacted his sense of self and his sense of the university.
I've had an experience because I'm a black man, I'm relatively tall, I'm relatively big. There's always this, like, I've definitely experienced some microaggressions in terms of I don't belong on this campus because I don't fit in to what someone might think of as a Duke student because of their own discriminatory ideas. I know that this was around my sophomore year where I was coming back from, I think, the library to my dorm, and I've been stopped, asked, are you a student? Do you go here? Let me see your ID. All types of stuff. I've been stopped on campus and off campus. It's just like with everything that's been going on in this country and the experiences that I've had all accumulated together. It's just this feeling in which, like, it just don't feel like I belong. It's almost like just the world around me just doesn't want me to succeed. The world around me is actually like actively working against me and my peers, and it's just making it harder and making our lives more difficult as we seek and like move towards our goals. So I feel like that can be said for, like, I feel like a lot of students may understand that too, but yeah. So it just feels a lot more difficult to really feel like I belong where I am now, and just in this country in general and on this campus. Just kind of feel like a stranger.
When we spoke to students about their experiences with discrimination, we started off by asking, when did you first realize that your Duke experience was different from that of some of your white peers? Cynthia Dong is an Asian American identifying sophomore who shared her experience with us.
I mean, I think I've always realized that, like, the white experience in any space is different than my experience, just because when I grew up in a very white community. So, like, that made me very aware of the differences between racial experiences from, like, a really young age. I think for me, being Asian, racism doesn't manifest as overtly for me. It's a lot more microaggressive, for the most part, at least. So, this kind of comes in the form of, I do notice sometimes professors, they will compliment other people for sharing insights or doing something. But when I do something, like, to the same degree, they just kind of gloss over it, almost like they're expecting it from me. That also isn't super common at Duke, at least. It has happened a couple of times where I do feel like because I'm Asian, I'm kind of being held to a higher standard almost, which kind of plays into, like, this model minority myth that I feel like I experience here sometimes. I think the real problem with like at least what I've experienced here is like when there is overt racism, like Asian culture is very much like if there's a problem, you don't talk about it, you ignore it, you push it under the rug, and you move on. You know, there's like this culture of not talking about your problems, and there's this culture of like pride almost, like don't let anyone see that they got to you, don't let anyone see that, you know, you're hurt. So especially with when coronavirus hit, you know, there was a lot more overt racism. I think when that happened, I remember there was some vandalism on a building, kind of, you know, targeting Asians. And, you know, I didn't really hear any of my Asian peers talk about it, actually.
The incident of vandalism that Cynthia is referring to was when the words F Rona were spray painted along one Chinese student's mural outside the Levine Science Research Center earlier this year. Dean Toddy Steelman of the Nicholas School for the Environment responded with an email to students acknowledging xenophobic and racist incidents against the Asian community throughout the United States. She said, "I want our Asian community members to know that we stand as allies to support you unconditionally through these challenging times. What hurts you hurts us all." Prejudice instances against Asian students and international students were not unheard of before this mural defacement. If you all recall, Duke made national headlines in 2019 when the former head of the master's program for biostatistics told Chinese students not to speak in their native language while in public. Sophomore Aisha Han discussed her truth as a Pakistani student at Duke and how discrimination can be felt across identities and nationalities.
The start of my first semester here, which was last year, I came to Duke knowing that I would have a very different experience from white Duke students, rich Duke students, and American Duke students, you know, and when that started being a little bit more apparent, I think is just in classes when sort of whiteness and Americanness would come together to produce sort of a very one-dimensional worldview that a lot of my classmates had, or even one of my professors. You know, I think intellectually, I definitely experienced a big difference. You know, obviously, I know that because of my visa status and because of my, if somebody perceives that I might be Muslim, you know, those will create a little bit of a cultural barrier, right? And that would definitely be apparent when in O Week, we would all introduce ourselves and, you know, there would be a group of white people and they would bond over how they were all from like the Bay Area or, you know, XYZ state. And I would just be like, "Hi, I'm Aisham, I'm from Pakistan." And they would be like they don't know what to make of that, you know. And that happened much more with white people, but it also happened just writ large at Duke.
Let's also take a moment to hear from Aaliyah Baker, a grad student pursuing an MFA in dance and who graduated from Duke as an undergrad in 2003.
So, let's see. For my undergrad experience, I maybe was still kind of coming into my understanding of, you know, what aggressions were and the kind of day in, day out discrimination that happens. So I don't know if I was like as aware of it as I, you know, am now, kind of being back at the institution now. But I do remember really vividly that the Black folks on campus were really trying to kind of form alliances and to have places to kind of talk about what it was, you know, to be sort of this minority group on campus. And I remember, I want to say it might have been like sophomore or junior year where there were a couple of racist incidents that happened on campus. And we had a sit-in and a gathering to kind of protest these instances. And, you know, it was like reported to the Chronicle and things like that. And I can't say that I was surprised, but it definitely was sort of something that kind of like popped that bubble, the illusion of sort of like everyone kind of gets along at Duke and, you know, you're in this little bubble while you're on campus. It definitely sort of like really opened my eyes to the fact that, you know, even though we were all students together and learning together, that there were definitely people who maybe did not want me to be there or didn't think I belonged on campus or, you know, at an institution like Duke.
Those sorts of calls for equality on campus had been occurring at Duke since they first allowed Black students to attend in 1963. You all may have heard of the 1969 Allen Building takeover, which brought together between 50 to 75 students who wanted to bring attention to the needs of African American students on campus. Similar notable incidents, students demanding that the university work to end racism and discrimination on campus, took place in 1975, 1979, 1985, 1989, and 1997. If one goes back through the Chronicle archives, in 2001, when Aaliyah would have been an undergraduate student at Duke, it was reported many faculty members of color were, at the time, leaving the university, citing an unpleasant racial climate and discrimination. And in the same year, 3 days of protests and sit-ins took place on the quad outside the Duke Chronicle offices after the newspaper printed an ad arguing against reparations. Aaliyah talks about the popping of the proverbial bubble, the moment as a student of color or of diverse identity that it really hits, how your Duke experience will be a bit different, perhaps a bit more difficult than it is for your peers. I know personally, the when of my realization came a bit later than I would like to admit. It was after a few bad roommate experiences. The first, my freshman fall semester, lasted a couple weeks before they decided, with little notice, they wanted to move out. In the interim, we didn't talk. She refused to make eye contact with me. She always seemed scared to look me in the face. And then she disappeared. The second was my junior fall semester. This girl lasted maybe 2 days before I was notified she'd be moving out. I found out that in the 2 days since I moved in, she told our resident coordinator that she was in fear for her life and didn't feel safe rooming with me. Now, that one hit a bit different. It's hard to tell yourself, good riddance, they probably would have been a terrible roommate anyway, when it feels like such a personal attack on your character. We at Bridging the Gap wanted to understand why these interactions go so poorly. What barrier needs overcoming to reach a point of civility, if not comfort, with each other in these situations? Why do these interactions go bad? Let's hear from Dr. Gaither again, as she sheds some light on the nature of interracial interactions.
Every social interaction is very complicated because obviously there's multiple people involved, which means there's multiple identities also involved in any given moment. So what makes interracial interactions or cross-race interactions particularly stressful for people, especially on a college campus, is usually a white person is entering an interracial interaction and they're really nervous about being perceived as a racist, horrible person. And at the same time, a Black student in that same interaction is also nervous, but they're nervous for a very different reason, right? They're nervous about experiencing discrimination or prejudice. Again, if neither of these things are not necessarily going to happen, but when a white student is expecting one thing to happen and a Black student is worried about a different thing happening, these conflicting expectations end up butting heads. And that's actually what leads to so many negative cross-race interaction outcomes, is these conflicting expectations of how well or how horribly wrong we think a cross-race interaction is going to go. Then we end up overthinking what we're saying, overthinking what we're doing, and it ends up making those interactions not very great for anyone.
So what next? How do we overcome? That's a difficult question, one which we will touch on in part 2 of this episode. But before we end today, we want to dive a bit deeper into these experiences. One point that has come up in our conversations with the Duke community is the concept of self-segregation. Tribalism, if you will. This is the categorization and subsequent self-isolation of like groups. People who look like you, talk like you, grew up like you did. This isn't necessarily bad all the time. Sometimes we need that time with people who are like us, who have similar experiences, and can thus empathize with our lives and struggles. But to some, Duke propagates self-segregation to an unhealthy level, one that negatively impacts those on the outside, the other, and usually the non-white. Here's Aisham with her opinion.
Just the social culture at Duke is built on segregation. A lot of it on racial lines or sort of, identity. But just in general, we have so many people, like a majority of Duke students that are either Greek affiliated or in SLGs. And that kind of thing just, it prevents people from wanting to talk to anyone new, or outside of their immediate sort of comfort zone and social circle. So that's one huge issue. And I honestly think, if I were like dictator of Duke, I think I would just do away with that.
Dr. Gaither expressed something similar.
As a university, we can't randomly assign all same-race roommates to live together and not think about the other identities that also lead to various forms of discrimination in the dorms, right? So you have to think about LGBTQ identities, first-generation, limited-income student identities. All of these things actually intersect with each other and can create a lot of forms of discrimination. So it's not just a cross-race experience that can lead to bad roommate outcomes. So I want to make sure that's clear to everyone. We all have a tendency to self-segregate, and it's because we like people who are like us. That's just a natural human tendency. We like people who think like us. We like people who look like us. And for underrepresented individuals, it's really important to still have those safe spaces and those circles of friends and support systems so that you can properly deal with the different forms of discrimination that you might be facing on our college campus or elsewhere. Once you leave college, you're not always going to be in an environment surrounded by people who think exactly like you do. And college really is one of those rare chances where I think students really need to take advantage of learning how to thrive and how to survive in different diverse contexts.
It feels as though we're in a crucial moment for clarity right now. The Black Lives Matter protests this summer have brought to light in a new way the experience of the BIPOC individual. And we see newsrooms, offices, and institutions across the country scrambling to address their own internal injustices. President Vincent Price recently came out with a statement of anti-racism, a stance on the part of the university, and a statement of purpose around actionable next steps. His statement attempts to address systemic racism at all levels, and from a student perspective, the university has begun work around a new Foundations of Equity orientation program, more work to actively diversify the student body, and the creation of an undergraduate hate and bias working group for greater transparency. These conversations around equity, inclusion, and biases are popping up in departments across the university. And so, in the least, we want to take a moment to acknowledge that the university also acknowledges the problems within its own walls. We've thrown a lot of facts and statistics at you. We want to end today with a poem. This spoken word poem is by Dainez Smith, read at the Rust Belt 2014 in Detroit. This is Dear White America.
Dear White America, I've left Earth in search of darker planets, a solar system that revolves too near a black hole. I left a patch of dirt in my place, and many of you won't know the difference. Give it my name if it makes you feel better while you run your hands through its soiled scalp. I've left in search of a new God. I do not trust the God you have given us. My grandmother's hallelujah is only outdone by the fear she nurses each time the blood-fat summer swallows another child who used to sing in the choir. Take your God back. Though his songs are beautiful, his miracles are inconsistent. I want the fate of Lazarus for Anisha. I want Chucky, Bo, Mo, Sean, Islan, Trayvon risen 3 days after their entombing. Their ghosts re-gifted flesh and blood. Their flesh and blood re-gifted their children. I have left Earth. I am equal parts sick of your go back to Africa's as I am your I just don't see races. Neither did the poplar tree. We did not build your boats, though we did leave a trail of kin to guide us home. We did not build your prisons, though we did, and we fill them too. We did not ask to be part of your America, though are we not America? Her bones brittle and dragging a ripped gown through Oakland. I will not stand your ground. I am sick of calling this recklessness the law. Each night I count my brothers, and in the morning, when some do not survive to be counted, I count the holes they leave. Your master magic trick, America. Now he's breathing, now he don't. Abracadabra, white bread voodoo, your rope burned hands, tired of the noose. Hand my cousin a pistol to do your work. I tried, white people. I tried to love y'all, but you spent my brother's funeral making plans for brunch, talking too loud next to his bones. You took one look at the river plump with the body of boy after sweet boy and asked, why does it always have to be about race? Because you made it that way. Put an asterisk next to my sister's gorgeous face. Call her pretty for a black girl because black girls go missing without a whisper of where, because there are no Amber Alerts for the amber-skinned girls, because Jordan boomed, because Emmett whistled, because Huey P spoke it, because Martin preached it, because black boys have always been too loud to live, because it's taken my father's time, my mother's time, my aunts and my uncle's time, my sisters and my brother's time. How much time do you want for your progress? I have left Earth and I won't stop until I find a place where my kin can be safe, until black people ain't but people the same color as the good wet earth, until that means something. Until then, I bid you well, I bid you war, I bid you our lives to gamble with no more. I have left Earth and I am touching everything you beg your telescopes to show you, giving the stars their right names in this New Testament, this new story you cannot see or touch or ruin this, if only this one is ours.
We hope you enjoyed our first episode of Bridging the Gap. I want to reiterate the purpose of this series. It is to highlight, to share the truth of Duke's diverse student body. It is not to attack, it is not to shame. And we look forward to having more conversations with you all as the year continues. Join us for part 2, where we discuss the interracial nature of discrimination and thoughts on how Duke and Duke students can be better and do better to end the cycle of prejudice.